All right, so today we're diving into something pretty wild. We're talking democracy, but not as we know it. Like, forget elections, forget presidents, forget prime ministers. We're
Yeah.
going full-on thought experiment here.
Exactly. Yeah, we're looking at how democracy could work without a single leader at the helm.
Our source material is a goldmine for this, by the way.
Hmm.
We've got academic papers, political theories, even some really out there ideas about AI running the show.
It's all about grappling with those big questions.
Yeah.
How do you share power, and how do you make sure it actually represents the people?
Okay, so first up, decentralized citizen committees. Picture this. Your city doesn't have one mayor, it has dozens of committees.
Sure.
And they're made up of regular people, your neighbors, local business owners. Each committee focuses on a specific thing, like education or the environment, or even just the local park budget.
It's hyper-local decision-making on steroids.
Hmm.
The source we're looking at here suggests this is about giving citizens a direct voice. Plus, splitting power up like this among so many groups makes it way harder for corruption to take root.
Yeah, I can see the appeal, but logistically, wouldn't this be a nightmare? I mean, coordinating all those committees, making sure they're all working together, not against each other.
Oh, absolutely. That's the big trade-off they highlight, how to balance all that participation with actually getting things done effectively.
Makes you wonder, though, if people had a direct say in, like, the stuff that directly affects them every day, would more people actually get involved in local government?
It's an interesting thought. Maybe if you had a say in whether a new park gets built in your neighborhood or how the schools are run, it would definitely change people's perspectives.
Okay, let's shift gears to liquid democracy. This one is all about choice, like maximum choice.
Imagine voting on every single issue. Local, noise ordinances, national health care, you name it. You could be as involved as you want.
To be honest, that sounds exhausting. I can barely keep up with my own inbox, let alone vote on every single policy decision out there.
And that's where the liquid part comes in. You can totally vote on everything, or you can delegate your vote to someone you trust, like, say, an expert on that specific issue.
So you're basically saying, hey, you know more about this than I do. Go vote on my behalf.
Exactly. It's a fascinating way to balance individual participation with, well, acknowledging that not everyone's an expert on everything.
But wouldn't that lead to problems? Like, couldn't someone become a superdelegate, racking up votes from tons of people?
Oh, for sure. That's a risk, they point out. It's that classic question of power dynamics, even in a system designed to be more equal.
Okay, moving on. Let's talk about participatory circles, which tries to bridge local and national levels of government.
It's very bottom up. Think of local communities forming circles to talk about and decide on local issues. Then representatives from those circles meet at a regional level, and then those representatives go to a national level and so on.
So instead of one president or prime minister, you have this web of decision-making, ideally representing everyone.
Yeah, and the source really emphasizes how this could boost civic engagement, making sure decisions are made collaboratively from the ground up.
Sounds good in theory, but practically speaking, how do you keep things from becoming chaotic? Like, how do you make sure information flows properly between all these circles?
Yeah, communication is key. They stress that without open communication channels between all these different levels, the whole thing could fall apart.
It seems like this balance between local control and bigger picture coordination is a theme we keep coming back to. Speaking of balance, let's talk technocracy. This one gets interesting.
What if, instead of career politicians, we had councils of experts making decisions? Like scientists, engineers, economists, people like that.
So basically, the government runs like a giant research lab, using data and analysis to decide on policies. Sounds efficient, I'll give you that.
Right.
But wouldn't that risk creating a system that's completely out of touch with what everyday people actually want and need?
That's the big question, right? And then there's accountability. If it's just experts making all the calls, how do you hold them accountable to the people they're governing?
Yeah, tough one. You want decisions based on facts and knowledge, but you also need to make sure those decisions actually reflect what people want. Okay, buckle up because this next one is straight out of science fiction. Algorithmic democracy.
This takes data-driven decision-making to a whole new level. Imagine an AI so advanced it can gather everyone's opinions, values, everything, and then it uses all that data to figure out the optimal solutions for society's problems.
Okay, I'll admit, part of me thinks that's kind of cool, but are we really going to let an algorithm run the world? And whose definition of optimal are we talking about here? That seems like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. The source we're looking at brings up all those ethical questions, like even if an AI could theoretically make more rational choices than us, should we let it?
It's like we're talking about the future of democracy itself here.
We are. And it forces us to confront some really deep questions about power, governance, and how technology fits into all of that.
Okay, let's move on to something a bit more grounded. Governance cooperatives. Imagine your entire country run like a giant co-op.
Every single citizen is a member with an equal say in how things are run. It's all about collaboration, shared ownership, that sense of collective responsibility.
It sounds incredibly idealistic. But realistically, could a system like that actually function on a national scale? Wouldn't it just devolve into endless debates and bureaucracy?
Yeah, they acknowledge that. They say one of the biggest hurdles is figuring out how to make decisions efficiently while still making sure everyone's voice is heard.
Sounds like a tough needle to thread. All right, last but not least, we have horizontal networks. This one really flips the script.
We're talking about a society with no real hierarchy, no central power structure. People organize themselves into networks based on their interests or skills, and they work together that way.
It sounds incredibly freeing, almost utopian. But how do you deal with complex problems that need decisive action? Can you really get anything done when everyone has equal say and there's no clear leader?
Million-dollar question, right? The source acknowledges this model hinges on people's willingness to cooperate, to compromise, to work toward shared goals.
So we've looked at all these fascinating models, each with its own spin on how democracy could work without a single leader calling the shots. But let's get down to brass tacks here. How would these ideas actually play out in the real world? How would they affect everyday people like you and me?
That's what it all boils down to, right? It's easy to get lost in the theory, but the real meat is in how these models translate into lived experiences.
Exactly. So let's ditch the abstract and get concrete.
Sure.
What are the tangible ways these systems could change our lives?
Well, the distribution of power is a big one. In these models, power isn't about one person or even a small elite. It's spread out, often directly to the citizens.
And that has huge implications for, well, everything. How decisions are made, who gets a say, how you hold people accountable.
Right. We've seen time and again that too much power in the hands of a few is a recipe for disaster. It breeds corruption, and it rarely benefits the majority.
So spreading that power out is definitely appealing. But how do these models actually make sure power doesn't just end up concentrated somewhere else in ways we don't expect?
That's a key challenge. And these models tackle it in different ways. For example, decentralized citizen committees, remember those? They try to prevent power grabs by dividing decision-making among tons of local groups.
Makes sense. So many voices, it's harder for one to drown out the rest.
Exactly. While something like liquid democracy, with its delegate system, relies more on transparency and holding those delegates accountable.
It always comes back to balance, doesn't it? Empowering individuals without creating new opportunities for imbalance.
Always. And this ties into another huge thing, citizen participation. These models really make us rethink what it means to be an active citizen.
It's that age-old debate. Do you want a direct say in every decision, or are you happy to elect someone and let them handle it?
Right. These models offer a whole spectrum of possibilities between those two extremes.
And it makes you think about representation itself, right? Does electing someone really mean they represent you?
Exactly. Or can these other models, with their emphasis on direct democracy or collaboration, offer a more genuine kind of representation?
It's something to think about, especially with so many people disillusioned by traditional politics.
Yeah.
But okay, beyond participation, transparency is huge too, right?
Absolutely. Transparency is key, not just for accountability, but for building trust in the system itself. If you can see how decisions are made, who's making them, and why, you're more likely to believe the system is fair and actually working for you.
It's like lifting the curtain, right?
Yeah.
Because secrecy breeds suspicion, and suspicion just eats away at trust. And trust is essential in these systems where power is more spread out.
Exactly. But it's also a huge challenge. How do you maintain transparency with so many moving parts? All those committees, those networks, it could get messy.
So how do they propose to do it? Keep things transparent, I mean.
Well, they have different approaches. Some, like participatory circles, really hammer home open communication. Information has to flow freely between those decision-making levels.
Keeps everyone in the loop?
Right. Others, like algorithmic democracy, suggest using technology. Track every decision, make the whole process visible to everyone.
So tech could actually help make things more transparent.
It could, but it could also make things less transparent, depending on who controls it. It's a double-edged sword.
Isn't it always? Which brings us to another biggie, accountability. If there's no president or prime minister to hold responsible, how do you hold anyone accountable?
Now that's the million-dollar question. And it's even more relevant today with power becoming more diffuse. It's not just governments anymore, it's corporations, lobbyists, even social media influencers.
So how do you hold those diffuse power structures accountable?
Well, these models propose some interesting ideas. Some talk about stronger independent oversight, watchdogs. Others are all about giving citizens more direct control, like the ability to recall representatives or challenge decisions they don't agree with.
So basically, people power.
Exactly. An informed and engaged citizenry is crucial, not just for holding individuals accountable, but for ensuring the whole system can adapt and survive in the long run. Because let's be real, these models have their downsides too.
Yeah, we've been pretty optimistic so far. But it's important to be realistic. What are some of the weaknesses? What could trip these systems up? It's easy to get caught up in the idealism of these models, but we have to be honest about potential downsides too. What about weaknesses? Are there any cracks in these systems that could lead to instability, corruption, or even just make them completely ineffective?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We can dream up all sorts of fancy systems, but at the end of the day, they're still going to be run by humans. And humans come with, well, human flaws.
Exactly. So what are some of the practical challenges these models might face? Where could things go wrong?
Gridlock is a big one. When you spread decision-making power so widely, it can be really tough to get everyone on the same page, especially when you need to make quick, decisive choices.
Makes sense. Like, imagine trying to get a room full of people to agree on what pizza toppings to order, let alone a complex policy decision with huge consequences.
Exactly. And this is especially true for models like decentralized citizen committees or horizontal networks. They're great at including diverse voices, but that can also mean endless debates and stalled progress when time is of the essence.
So finding that sweet spot between inclusivity and efficiency is key. You don't want a system that's completely bogged down by bureaucracy, but you also don't want to sacrifice thoughtful deliberation for the sake of speed.
Absolutely. And here's another concern. What happens when local interests clash with the needs of the larger society? In systems where local communities or interest groups have a lot of power, there's a risk of short-sighted decisions that benefit a few at the expense of the many.
Right, like a community prioritizing its own economic growth, even if it harms the environment or neighboring communities.
Exactly. So these models need a way to balance local control with the bigger picture. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, and sometimes we need to make sacrifices for the greater good.
It's about finding that balance between individual needs and collective well-being, right?
Yeah.
A tall order for any system, no matter how well-intentioned.
Absolutely. And that's why having these conversations is so important. We need to think critically about the potential pitfalls as well as the promises of these alternative models.
Because even if none of these models is a perfect solution, they challenge us to reimagine what's possible. They push us to think outside the box and consider new ways of organizing ourselves and governing our societies.
Exactly. They remind us that democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires constant reflection, adaptation, and a willingness to experiment.
I love that. It's not about finding the perfect system, but about constantly striving for a better future. So to everyone listening, keep those brain gears turning. What resonated with you today? What would your ideal democracy look like? And most importantly, how can you, as an engaged citizen, help shape a future where governance truly reflects the will and serves the needs of the people? Because ultimately, the future of democracy is in our hands.